become a secret admirer of the industry massively. So just to kind of let everyone know, I will kind of probably come off this call in the next couple of moments, and I'm going to be watching via swap card. So all the questions that come through, I can then feed to them. When we've done this before in Teams, we have had loads of questions and also lots of comments and things coming in, which is why I'm hopefully we'll be able to kind of like, I'll be able to moderate some of those and kind of pick out some of the best ones to send to them. And then just as I mentioned again, afterwards, we do have the sort of breakout sessions, sort of smaller roundtables if people want to kind of carry on networking or chatting. It's something, you know, we're happy for you to join in as well. If you need to shoot off, that's absolutely fine. So yeah, just trying to bring in that extra bit of element and face-to-face contact between some of the delegates. So it's not just them talking through a chat box, just to give them the opportunity afterwards. So yeah, you're invited to do that. I don't know if anyone has any other questions for me. If not, I might kind of hop off and let you sort of sort through the last few technical things.
Yeah. No, I just wondered how many people you're expecting to join.
Harry, have you got the latest figures? I think we were.
So there's about 500 registrants, and I mean, I would hope that we'd hit 50% of that. That's kind of typical, but obviously, like Lem said, we are competing with the Chancellor today and a few other things. So who knows? But there'll be a lot of hopefully on demand watching as well. So yeah, a couple of hundred hopefully.
Thanks.
We always do a bit of a write up for those people who haven't tuned into the video in Construction News as well, and that's another way that people access it, and we lead them to a link through to the on demand. So we pick up views in that fashion as well. So. But generally speaking, the Women in Construction thread that we've been doing has been one of the better attended, much higher rate of conversion between people registering and actually turning up to listen. So I think our audience generally is pretty engaged with this, or rather the section of our audience that's engaged with these topics is pretty engaged with what we're doing in this thread. So fingers crossed, we'll get a good audience and good questions.
Brilliant.
Absolutely.
Harry, I don't know if you just want to, because I know Emma wasn't on the call initially. I'm going to hop off now, but if you want to just quickly run through again the cameras, so just Emma's aware of that, and then I'll catch up with anyone afterwards if anyone has any questions, and we can send through any sort of post-event activity. But good luck, and I look forward to watching it. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Charity.
I'm just going to pop out and tell the kids what's happening so they don't see. So I'll come back.
No problem. Thanks. Emma, so how this is going to work, so we are streaming via Zoom to our virtual event platform, the one that you mentioned in the email the other day.
Yeah.
So we've got people watching on that platform so they can engage with each other, ask questions, blah, blah, blah. We'll feed all that through to Lem, and he'll then address the questions as part of the call here.
Fine.
How it works is when your camera's on, you are on screen to everybody, and when you turn your camera off, you're off screen. So it's down to you to manage that. So obviously, to begin with, everyone's cameras will be off. We'll have a holding slide up in the next couple of minutes, which will say the session will begin shortly. And when I say turn camera off, I just mean the stop video button in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen.
Yeah.
And then Lem will come on screen at about 12:30ish, and he'll do an introduction, and he'll introduce you. And then you turn, when he introduces you, you turn on your camera and you'll be on screen. And then he'll turn his camera off. You do your presentation. Once your presentation's over, Lem will appear back on screen. He'll then introduce the other panelists. Everyone will join the call together. It'll be just the four of you on screen, and then the panel discussion continues. So actually, you don't need to worry about turning your camera on.
Basically, when I'm on, I'm on.
Yeah, exactly.
Fine.
All the way through.
Yeah,
that's fine.
And I guess the only other thing is when we go live in a couple of minutes' time, basically as soon as Catherine's got back, we're going to go live so that we have a holding slide up so that people can see that something's happening. Your microphone will be on if you say something. So if you could just mute yourself when we start to go live, and then only unmute yourself and put your camera on when instructs you to, that'd be great. But other than that, it's really straightforward. It's a Zoom call like we've all been doing for hundreds of years, it seems.
I know. And just on the question, so we don't see what's coming up in the chat function. It's being Lem, presumably you're just going to read and interpret over to us, so we won't get a stream of anything.
Exactly. No. So if that's a good point.
That's right. Well, yeah.
Go on.
Please don't have swap card running on your computer because it will create an echo. So just focus on, don't log into swap card, just focus on the Zoom call.
That's fine.
What Charity is going to be doing is filtering the questions and making sure that because obviously we've all been to conferences where people stand up and take the microphone and pretend to ask a question where actually they just want to sound off. She's going to filter out those people, give us the actual questions, hopefully in a sort of I've got open. So what I'll do is I'll read those out, and I'll try and put those in a what's the word, in a sort of as easy to comprehend format as possible. And I'll also indicate who I'm going to send the question to as well before I read it out, so you've got time to concentrate. So I'll say, Emma, perhaps you can take this one, and then I'll read it out.
That sounds
and obviously, if as I said in the notes, if I send a question to you that you really just don't know how to answer or don't want to answer, the best way is either to just say, oh, that's not really one for me, Lem, I'm not sure I can help on that one. Or to say, well, a more interesting question would be, and then talk about something else that you think might be interesting to that person who's raised that issue. So I'm not going to be a paxman. I'm not going to go, no, you haven't answered the question. So no, none of that today. We're all friends today and trying to help each other. And the other thing is, but interrupting each other on video tends to be disastrous. You know, you have that sort of meeting in a corridor thing of trying to give way to each other. It's better if you want to come into a discussion, if you can just sort of raise your hand. I'll be watching the video streams from all of you and can see, and we'll bring you in by name. And it's just a much more comfortable watching experience for everyone if I sort of moderate that. It's not me being being bossy, honestly. Just trying to create a smooth transition from one speaker to the next. So that hopefully will work out okay. And the other thing is, if you can, it's difficult, I know, when you're answering questions, if you can avoid having a long pause and then a last remark, because I'll be diving in that long pause because I'll assume you finished. So if it sounds like you finished, please finish. You know what I mean? We shall hopefully have a smooth discussion. Should be okay.
Okay, cool. I'm going to ask that we get started and we just start the stream. So if you could all turn your cameras and your microphones off, that'd be great. And I'll share my slide, and then we'll be good to go. So good luck, everyone. Thanks very much for your participation. And any questions, you can use the chat box if you need to say anything. Use the chat box on Zoom. That is not visible to the outside world, so we can communicate with each other if you need something urgent. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Thanks. Hello and welcome to this afternoon's webinar. My name is Len Bingley and I'm the editor of Construction News. Now, today's event is the first in this year's calendar for our Inspiring Women in Construction programme. This is our 4th year of events focused on helping women in the industry make career progress and on helping companies become more welcoming to women. I'm delighted that Wilmot Dixon has once again agreed to provide headline sponsorship for our Inspiring Women series throughout 2021. Wilmot Dixon has supported the programme from the start, and it's a testament to how seriously the company takes the issues of diversity and inclusion that it is still with us, and it has sponsored the programme throughout the COVID crisis. Changing hearts and minds really does require long-term commitment, and Wilmot Dixon continues to show that determination, and I'm very grateful. We're also grateful for the support of Juice, returning for a 2nd year, and we hope to see more firms come on board as the year progresses and hopefully as the economy improves this year. If you're watching this live, you'll have noticed we have adopted a new platform this year, Swapcard, which, as the name suggests, is not just a webinar platform. It's a means to connect, to network, and to hopefully to share your thoughts with each other. Now, we know a lot of women in construction tune into these webinars, and we hope that this platform will help to create something of a community or to make it simpler for women in this industry to find, to help and support each other. And of course, these sessions are also for men, they're not just for women. We hope that when men in our industry who want to see the industry improve will engage in today's debate. We'll also be using the same platform throughout the year and probably beyond. So your profile should stay in place, it will stay in place, and you can join later sessions. And any connections you make will stay put, and hopefully that'll be a useful resource for you throughout the year. We've used this platform before for our virtual conferences, and we know it can add a lot of value beyond a simple webinar, and we hope after today's event you'll agree. Also new for this year are a series of inspiring stories where we aim to have a video showcase for the achievements of outstanding women in our sector who'll share their thoughts and experiences. The first of these, with the amazingly talented Ronnie Savage, is live already, and I urge you to watch it if you haven't done so already. Just click the Inspiring Stories button on our Swapcard homepage. Okay, let's move on to today's programme. We are going to start with a presentation on flexible working, followed by a panel discussion where the focus will be on equality of opportunity in the new normal. That's the post-COVID working world we are all grappling with. After that, there will be an opportunity to meet and discuss the issues raised today with other delegates via some virtual breakout rooms hosted through Microsoft Teams. We'll be posting a link to join those discussions at the end of the panel debate. And don't worry, if you don't have Teams installed, you can join by your browser. During the panel debate, we'll be taking questions for all of our speakers today, and you can raise any questions you have via the live discussions panel on your screen. There's a chat tab if you just want to share your own thoughts with everybody else who's watching, but there's a questions tab if you're looking for an actual answer from our speakers. So do please post your questions there as soon as they occur to you. There's no need to wait for the Q&A to start. That's probably enough from me. I'm going to hand over now to Emma Stewart from the TimeWise Foundation. Emma, if you want to switch on your camera and unmute, Emma will be updating us on the impact of flexible working in construction. So over to you.
Thanks, Lem. I'm delighted to be here, and thank you very much for having me. So I'd like to talk to you today about flexible working, which is obviously in theory doing right now, but particularly how flexible working can help organisations, particularly in construction, to ensure that you can attract and retain a really diverse talent pool, but also make sure that we are able to use how we design work as a way to enable greater equality and inclusion in our workplaces. So I'm going to spend about sort of 15 to 20 minutes sharing some reflections. I wanted to really kind of touch on 3 points. First is, what do we know about the state of flexible working construction pre the last year we've been in? Secondly, what have we learned from this last year of all working differently in terms of how has the pandemic shifted the way we think about work? And what lessons can we take from that, both in terms of opportunities, but also maybe some risks to be careful of, to think about how we can build a more systemic and a more inclusive approach to working going forward. And then finally, what should good look like? What does good look like? What should good look like? I just wanted to share some reflections on a major programme that we have been doing at Timewise with a number of major construction firms, looking in particular at how to improve flexible working on site. But just before I start, by way of introduction, I've been obsessed by flexible working for the last 15 years. So I co-founded Timewise. We're a social business, and our mission is to ensure everybody gets the flexibility they need in work without compromising their careers. We actually started life as women like us, coaching women back to work post children. Quickly realised that we didn't really need to fix the women. What we needed to do was fix the way the jobs market and the labour market operates. So now we do three main things. The first is we do a lot of research and awareness raising to both businesses and policymakers to promote the benefits of a fairer, flexible jobs market. The second, crucially for us, is we focus on the how. We go into businesses every day and we help them to get better at flexible working through a range of consultancy programs and training. And then the last thing that we do is we run our own job site. So for us, it's really important that people who want their next job to be a good and flexible job get access to the jobs that are available. They're open to flexible working from day one. And we represent about 100,000 candidates on our books, both women and increasingly men who just want to work differently and who don't want to have to compromise on career progression to do so. So that's a bit about us. So I guess if I start with what does flexible working look like in construction? And again, we're not construction experts. I should say at Timewise, our client base is very broad. They range from Google through to Tesco through to NHS trusts. But we do and have been working in construction. So some reflections that I will give will be based on the wider market and our experience over the years of working with many of the FTSE 500 to improve their approach. But let's look at construction to begin with. What do we know about flexible working construction? And how does that link to gender? Well, I mean, I don't need to tell you all here today, there is a direct correlation between the gender pay gap and organisations that embrace flexible working. We think of it often as a gender progression gap. Women increasingly want to work flexibly, as do men, need to work flexibly for caring responsibilities. And we have a distinct motherhood penalty, often where we find women either off-ramp, drop out of work, or look to work differently, and then their chances of progressing in work are prohibited by the lack of flexibility the higher up you go in organisations. So we have an issue in construction, we know, with gender balance, a workforce of less than around about 15% of women, and far less so when we look at sites and trades. There are lots of reasons for this, but the lack of flexible working and the way that we create structural barriers to women and increasingly men to work differently, it is a key one. It's an industry with long hours. It's an industry where people travel away from home a lot. It has high stress. It has high mental health issues, and it affects men as well as women. So issues around well-being and mental health from the broader inclusion of gender are really important in the industry, we know, as well as issues around gender parity. And when I say flexible working, it's an industry that has a complex relationship with flexibility. At Timewise, we talk about flexible working across three axes: how much we work, so whether we're working part-time or full-time; where we work, which clearly in construction has historically been a challenge because the assumption is you have to be in an office or on a site to do your work; and then when we work, which again in industries like construction, particularly in operational roles, is an issue because often we need to be working on projects, working in teams, and the ability to flex start end of days can be quite challenging. So we know it's complex in the industry to get it right, and we know at the moment that if you want to work in construction, or if you want to move in construction, you have very few jobs that are open to flexible working from day one to apply for. And our research at Timewise tracks the state of the flexible jobs market, so how many jobs are open to flexible working from day one, crucially not after 6 months. We know the national average is only still around 22%. But construction is one of the worst sectors for advertising jobs as flexible. So if you wanted to pick any sector to work in and you needed some form of flexibility, construction would probably not be on your list initially. Only 12% of job vacancies in construction reference the opportunity to work flexibly at the point of hire. So there's clearly a need to stimulate more proactive conversations about flexible working for women and for men, for all kinds of reasons. And there are clearly commercial necessities to do this for the industry to make sure that it can both attract and retain great talent and also diverse talent. So there's a need to do something. There is also an opportunity to do something because we have just lived through a year of working differently. And so the reason I wanted to sort of talk about this today is because I think we've got an opportunity to act now, to catalyse and to hold on to some of the things that we've learned, but also to be mindful of some of the risks that COVID has flagged in the context, particularly around gender equality. So that's a bit about how the lay of the land. So what have we learned from the last year? Well, we've learned some tough but some really good lessons. I mean, it's been, we all know, a really, really difficult year for everyone. But we've learned that the reasons to say no to flexible working have in theory been busted. We know that we've kind of ripped the rule book up when it comes to thinking about working differently. Many business leaders have realised that they can trust people who work differently and who work remotely. And they have also realised that roles that we never thought possible to be done out of offices or off sites have been, and particularly in construction, we've seen that. We've also learned that the last year has shown that the stigma around flexibility has to a certain extent disappeared. Working from home has humanised us. It's democratised flexibility. We've seen all kinds of people with their family, with their pets, working differently. And there's an opportunity here from a communication perspective to think about how we can leverage that. It's not just for mum's conversation. You know, flex is for everybody, and everybody has to a certain extent this year worked differently and worked flexibly. We've also learned that we can be, in the main, as productive. Although having said that, we have definitely seen in the last 4 to 6 months some real challenges with people sustaining this way of working. But crucially, you know, we haven't all fallen off a cliff. We've managed to cope. And we've learned that the demand for flexible working is enormous. Prior to the pandemic, we at Time Waste did lots of research. We knew that roughly 9 out of 10 people in the UK wanted to have some flexibility and crucially control over how they work when it comes to how much, when or where. What we've seen over this last year is just how enormous that demand is. You'll see all the reports, you know, ranging from sort of an average 70% of people, I think, want to retain some form of flexible working. And businesses are waking up to that and are looking at how do we manage the transition? How do we manage the going back to the office, stroke not going back to the office, hybrid working, etc. So we have an opportunity to catalyse here. But we've also got some warning signs as well. So we have all seen, we've all been under strain. We have seen well-being plummet in many organisations, and we've seen real work creep between, you know, whether we're at our office desk or our kitchen table. It's fair to say, and it's a really important point, that what's happened over the last year has been a remote working experiment, and remote working is only one form of flexible working. So we have seen people working in different locations in the main, but what we have not necessarily seen is people working less. It's actually the opposite. On average, the UK has been working around 2 hours more a day, as have many other European and global firms. What's slightly concerning, according to OECD analysis, is that European firms are starting to go back to normal working hours. We in the UK are not. And for an industry like construction that has always had long hours, that's clearly a watch out when it comes to thinking about well-being. We've also seen issues around isolation, issues around communication. You will all know, you know, working in this way permanently is not ideal. And we've also learned that the pandemic has not been the same for everybody. I mean, it's an obvious but important thing to say. So from a ED&I perspective, from an inclusion perspective, we have not had the same experience. And women have definitely disproportionately taken on more. And we know from lots of research, we have taken on more domestic responsibilities, more homeschooling, and more of the other work that we need to do in our households. Women have also fallen out of work, slightly more than men. And we know from reports from the TUC that a significant proportion of women have actually been refused furlough due to the need to try and work less or be on furlough because they have not been able to manage work and caring responsibilities. We know it's affecting men as well, but the disproportionate burden is falling on women. And that's a big watch out in terms of thinking about not rowing the clock back on gender equality. It's an irony that we have a flexible working sort of revolution in theory, but we want to make sure that actually women do not miss out because of it. And we've also seen that as well as women suffering, we have seen people working in frontline industries and in lower paid roles also being disproportionately advantaged. And again, in construction, I'm sure it's a big experience for those of you managing site projects. It's really challenging to create consistency around this because for many sites, clearly some people were able to work from home and have done, but many people can't. And so you have a kind of flex have and have not challenge where your knowledge-based workers are able to work remotely and your site-based teams can't. So, we have an issue around fairness when it comes to thinking about how we move through this and out the other side. So, so what needs to be done? Well, what can we learn from what we've learned over the last year, and also what we know about how to improve flexible working more broadly? I'll just give you some thoughts based on what we've seen in the market at Timewise, and then I'm going to talk to you a bit about construction. But broadly, there are kind of three things to focus on. The first to focus on is we need to really adapt our culture and our behaviours to make sure that we can sustain ways of working flexibly and to make sure that they are inclusive and fair and consistent as we come out the other side of this. For many years, we've had in business generally an assumption that flexible working is wrapped around individuals, and at Timewise we call that the sort of request response model, which is it's the law kind of describes it, the right to request. The assumption is you work full time, and then if you want to work flexibly, it's up to the individual to ask. So many businesses for a long time have been in reactive mode. We actually need to flip that. We need to start thinking much more proactively within our organisations, whether we're managers, whether we're business leaders, or we want to be encouraging our managers and business leaders to do this. We need to put the onus on the organisation, and smart businesses recognise that and are doing that. So just to give you an example, I mean, pre-pandemic, we did some research with the Chartered Management Institute, and it highlighted that only 1 in 5 managers had ever had a proactive conversation with an individual about how they were working at a performance review. So not just, are you delivering outputs and performance, but is the way that you're working enabling you to do your best work? So we need to start having proactive conversations. And that's driven from the top. That's driven from a culture and a framework around flexibility, where businesses who are smart are now recognising that it's no longer enough just to have a flexible working policy, but to have a really clear vision for how you want your people to work and to articulate that, whether it's in guidance, whether it's on your careers pages, but just to be really proactive in saying, this is how we do flexible working, and this is what the options are for our people, and this is something we believe in, and this is something we embrace. If your business leaders are not there yet, and many aren't, then, and there is a risk about not going back to the way things were, then we would urge you to look at the data, look at the surveys, flag to them wherever you can the demand for people to work differently. And whilst, yes, we know we're in a very difficult labour market, all of the wider research is suggesting that people will walk if they can't retain some form of flexibility as we come out of this. The other thing in terms of cultural behaviours is that good organisations empower teams to work this out. So this isn't all on HR, this isn't all on business leaders, but actually if you can be proactive and encourage those open and honest conversations, then you can find that actually teams often have really, really good ways of collectively working out how to make sure that work gets done, because everybody is interdependent with everybody else. Making sure that we communicate, making sure that we encourage our teams to take some shared responsibility about how we work together if we're working differently. So really important, kind of the culture and the behaviour piece, and how we role model and how we do that and how we communicate proactively around this agenda matters. The second thing that matters is making sure that managers are equipped to know how to manage flexible teams. Now, we provide lots of training at Timewise on this, but it's an interesting debate, which is we often, when we see organisations looking to improve their approach to flex, we'll do the kind of big statement and we'll do some of that culture work. But actually, we don't train managers in how to manage flexible working or in flexible job design in this country in the main. And if we're expecting our managers to manage people working very differently, we need to support them to know how to do that. And that means thinking through how to have those conversations and how to explore in different tasks and different roles how much work needs to get done, when it needs to get done and where. So we want to avoid the sort of conversation of somebody saying, I want to go from 5 days to 3, please. I'd like to work part-time. A manager desperate to not lose them says yes. Where do the 2 days go? Do they get consumed and people end up working more days and being paid for less? Do they get put on another member of the team who doesn't know? We've got to start really understanding how to create these kind of solutions and help managers to understand how to do this. And that means having a framework. It means not just seeing flexible working as a sort of D&I initiative, but it means actually making sure as organisations that we start to think differently about how we support our teams, from performance reviews through to setting objectives and targets and managing by output, through to how we promote our brands, as recognising that we need to be thinking about how we work. And we need to do that at a performance review perspective as well, because if we don't, we often don't adjust the way that when people work part-time, we don't adjust expectations. And then we wonder why part-time workers get overlooked for promotion. And within all of this, there is clearly a real issue right now around thinking about hybrid working. How do we go back to offices? How do we work differently? And it's a whole topic on itself. Again, we do a lot on this at Timewise, but it's going to be a challenge, and we would urge firms to think about principles, not necessarily new rules of 3 days in the office, 2 days at home. You know, the kind of questions we need to be asking ourselves is, you know, are we open to everybody working flexibly, or is it subject to role or task? You know, are we home first or are we office first? You know, what are the kind of principles we want to establish? And then finally, in terms of things that we need to be thinking about, recognising that if we are going to be retaining flexible working for our teams, and if we are as organisations advocating this, we need to think about it inclusively. So what that means is making sure that we have a fair process, even if we can't have the same fair outcome for all. So making decisions, are we going to say that there is flex in every role? It may be different, but there could be some form of flex. Recognising that different groups of people will need different kinds of flexibility, and working through how to respond to that. And also, we would urge thinking about what we call a reason-neutral approach, which is, you know, if we have debunked some of those gender stereotypes around flexible working is mainly because, you know, offered to people because they're mums, we need to be moving through that into a reason-neutral approach, which is it's for men and women, but also it's for people for all kinds of reasons, and that's okay. If there's one thing we've learned from this, that it's okay to work differently, and businesses can accommodate and facilitate that. And we need to be careful when we do, and when we start to develop hybrid approaches to work, that whilst we take that approach, we are also really conscious of bias, and that we will not, when we have people who are retaining a lot of flexible working from home, overlooked for the office chats and the opportunities. And that's going to be hard, and it's going to be a challenge, but it is possible to work through and we will be on Zoom, and we will be working remotely for some time to come, and we have to do that if we want to be inclusive. So finally, just I guess to sort of give a sort of an example of what good looks like, or what good could look like, and to talk specifically about some of the things we've learned in construction just for the last few minutes. So it's fair to say that change is happening everywhere and has done over this last year, and all the firms that we are dealing with have not got a kind of clear solution necessarily, or one size fits all, and nor should they. But for the last 18 months at Timewise, we've been working with 4 major firms on within construction, BAM Nuttall, BAM Construct, Wilmot Dixon, and Skanska, to try and test how to improve flexible working actually for teams on sites. It's been a deep dive. We did a big diagnostic to work out what the issues were. We've designed pilots, we've trained managers, and we've coached and supported teams on sites to work differently. And just to give you some sort of headlines in terms of what we've learned is it, and obviously this has been catalysed by COVID, but we've learned it is possible to create flex in many roles, to give people control and input into how they work. Our teams did everything from staggered start and finish times, to compressed hours when they were travelling away from home, to looking at team-based rostering in sort of pods and clusters so that they could have some kind of input, to output-based working, kind of old-fashioned sort of job and knock schemes, but coming back with small teams. And we include labour desk and supply chains in order to make it fair. So the report will be published at the end of May. I won't go into all the detail, but it is possible, and construction can do this. Why it worked? Partly because they had to, but some of the lessons were communication from the top was really clear. We want to change the way we operate. We will not judge you. There is no guilt here. Managers were brought in, and managers worked with smaller teams, communicating far more about preferences and how people needed to work. We redefined the why. It wasn't just an occasional, I need to see the doctor, I need to do something different. It was it's okay to ask. And the teams that we worked with, the foremen on the sites, felt able to have those open and honest conversations because that stigma and that culture had gone away, and they felt able to test different ways of working. And the impact has been significant. Wellbeing scores, engagement scores, and a sense of control had gone up for pretty much every pilot that we worked on. We had, and this was mainly men actually, we were working with, giving us stories about how they finally knew where their kids' classroom was, and they actually on first term terms with the teacher, something, you know, people who'd just not done school drop-off ever before. And we had guys cooking meals in the evenings as opposed to eating out of tin cans. I mean, these are kind of harsh stories, but really powerful. And critically, commercially, the projects are doing fine. So it was a really interesting kind of experiment to show that actually you can facilitate more control. Clearly there are bigger issues, but this is something just really powerful. So just to kind of leave with a couple of thoughts, 4 things really. First is, I guess 4 questions for you. First, are you putting in place the communication and the kind of culture change you want? Secondly, does your team believe that there is flexibility in every role? And are you considering that? If not, why not? Thirdly, are you ensuring, or is your organisation ensuring, that everybody has access that's fair to different ways of working flexibly? And finally, are you open as an organisation, or is your organisation open to flex from day one? And if so, is it saying so? If your businesses, your organisations aren't doing this, I would urge you to ask them why not. Because now's the opportunity to really rethink how we work, and hopefully to learn from this challenging period so that we can change the way we need to work for good for the future. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Emma. Absolutely fascinating presentation, and I certainly took away a lot of tips there about how I manage my team and how we advertise roles as well within Construction News. Now, if you could stay with us, Emma, we'll move on to our panel debate now. We're going to discuss how the pandemic has affected working patterns and what this means for women in the industry. So if our panelists could switch on their cameras, please. Now, joining Emma, we have Emily King from Mid Group and Catherine Wenger from Our. Emily, would you like to go ahead first and introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, thanks, and thank you, Emma. That was fascinating, actually. So my name's Emily King. I'm the Client Solutions Director at Midgroup. We are a relatively new construction firm that focuses on innovative ways of building. We don't think the construction industry has the answer yet, and we're trying to get closer to that. Background as an engineer.
Thanks, Emily. And Catherine, if you'd like to say a few words about yourself.
Yep. Afternoon, everybody. I'm Catherine Vengars. I'm a director at Arup. For those of you who don't know Arup, we're a firm of designers, consultants, planners, you name it. We get involved with all aspects of the built environment. So we're at the design side, but we're part of the construction ecosystem. And my role is to look after the infrastructure team in the west of the UK. And I have a particular interest in inclusion and all aspects of that and how that can bring about a wonderfully diverse, creative team that enjoys the work it does.
Thanks, Catherine. Well, let's plough straight on to the first question. In her presentation, Emma talked about how firms have come to trust people working remotely. We're in a situation where we've all had to adapt to new ways of working. Emily, from your perspective, do you perceive a risk that some roles will now be out of sight and out of mind, perhaps? How can we make sure that those who are working in home-based roles today remain visible, given that in construction, not everybody is working from home? What do you think, Emily?
Yeah, thanks, Lem. I think that's really interesting. And I think the first thing to say is because we all changed our habits or changed the way we work so reactively, I think it's okay, and especially listening to Emma's talk, it's okay to say that we haven't got the right answer yet. But what's not okay is to say, right, quick, let's give up and go back to how it was. So I think what we're actually trying to do right now in Midgroup is consolidate some of the things that we've tested, some of the things that we've seen come about naturally, and try and solidify them a little bit more. So things that we've tried and that I think have been really successful, but I didn't see it having the positive effect it did actually, but we have something called a girls' night in. And I think what surprised me quite a lot is that I've never considered the fact that in construction there is quite a habit of after work you go to the pub. Now, people who are caring, people who have caring responsibilities, people who are less confident, people who maybe don't like focusing their social lives around work or around alcohol, maybe don't tend to go to that. Now, without generalizing too much, that might mean that more men go to those events than women. Now, that's often the scenario in which somebody who is new to a business will meet the CEO out of context. You know, you really mix who is there. You might have a grad sat next to a director. You might have a planner sat next to a site labourer, and it really expands your understanding of the business. Now, through this girls' night in, we saw every woman in our company, you know, we're relatively new, so there's not a huge number, but coming together every couple of months, doing a quiz, having a chat. Now what I've seen after that is that people from across that group have approached me, and me vice versa, actually, if I want an opinion on what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong. I feel much more comfortable picking up the phone to them. Now, I'm not saying that's the correct setting or name, and you know, we'll move forward in one way or another, but it's been incredible to notice and recognize the fact that I didn't even know all the women in our company. Now for me, that's a negative realization, but really positive that we've got there. I think another thing that has definitely happened and has a similar positive effect is, rather than just walking through an office and saying that person looks okay, that person looks okay, and sitting down and letting people approach you, we're having one-to-one conversations on Teams. People feel like they have a dedicated voice to listen to, that they can hear. And I really think that the maybe less loud, maybe less confident people are having more of a voice and really demonstrating their ability more. So I really, really hope that we cling on to that and keep that going as a real positive outcome.
Thanks, Emily. Catherine, obviously Arup is a much larger organisation than Midgroup. What things do you think have worked for your from your perspective about making sure that people are equally visible no matter where they're working from?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things there. think the first one is about Teams etiquette. I've distinctly noticed a complete change in the equality of everybody around the table. We have now got into this wonderful habit of putting up our hands and keeping quiet and waiting for our chance to speak, or putting some comments in the chat. And that's been wonderfully leveling and has meant that we haven't had the dominant characters take over for the whole meeting. So for me, that's meant that everybody has had their voice heard. And the second one, I've written it down as my note, was about gate crashing. But I mean in that virtuous gate crashing, in that it's very easy to invite somebody else into the meeting. So we've had people chipping in from all around the world now. Oh, so-and-so knows about this. I'll just invite them in for 20 minutes. Whereas you wouldn't have bothered doing that before. And then you can also say to a junior member of staff, would you like to join for 20 minutes and just see what this meeting might be about? So again, that leveling up and bringing more people in as and when to spread the opportunities around.
Thanks, Catherine. And Nemo, on this topic of visibility, obviously you have some deep insight to the implications of flexible working. But what would you say to the individuals involved about how they can make sure that they remain visible if they fear that they may be overlooked because they're not present on site or not present in the office?
I mean, I think the first thing I'd say more broadly is I think we need to encourage more men to continue to work remotely as well as women, not to just make the assumption that it will be more women who will want to retain that. In terms of visibility, I think it's it's about making sure that in the way that we've always done before, you show the work that you've done. And there's lots of ways that we can make sure that we can ensure that our managers know how well we're performing, and making sure that we are accessible and we are able to present the outputs that we've delivered. And I think that's just about being creative and being directive with your manager in terms of how to do that. I think there are some very sort of simple things as well that we need to make sure we can do as teams, and that's if we are having all of our meetings on Zoom or Teams or whatever it is, we need to allow some networking time. So as Emily said, there's sort of out of work time, but we also, do meetings for 40 minutes and allow 10 minutes at the beginning to talk and 10 minutes at the end, because actually the risk is we don't network and then we miss those informal conversations. And that's, somebody said to me the other day, that's when the business actually really gets done in the meeting. It's the first 5 minutes and the last 5 minutes when you've got the couple of most important people in the room saying, what are we going to do about this? Being able to include more people in those conversations is really important.
Thanks, Emma. Let's move on to the next question. Obviously, many women are not very keen on the idea that when I talk about family responsibilities or childcare responsibilities, that it's solely a female issue. But for many women, it is a worry, and also for many men. Do you think the changes we've seen in the last year have been helpful in making more companies acknowledge that their employees have family responsibilities? Catherine, perhaps you can start. There's homeschooling issues to tackle. How do you think the industry has reacted? Construction's famous for its early starts, not exactly helpful if you've got the school run to do and things like that. What do you think has happened over the past year? Is it going to stick?
I tell you a little story from breakfast this morning. I was sorting breakfast out for 2 children and myself, and my mobile rang. I answered the mobile. It was a contractor I work a lot with. He said, oh, quickly, I've sent you something, please have a look before the meeting. I said, that's great, I'm just making breakfast for the kids. He said, oh, fine, we'll catch up later. And I don't think I would have been as honest with him a year ago. I think I would have actually let the porridge burn and gone, oh yes, I'll have a look at that and letter and I didn't. I just said to him, and it was fine. And I think what I really hope about is that openness and honesty will be able to carry on. And just as Emma was talking about different people doing the school drop-offs, I'm seeing all sorts of creative ways that families are making it work at the moment. And it is, it's inspiring to see, and I really hope it remains, but it's also, we're all learning that there's whole people and they have in lots of different complexities to their lives. And I hope that that means we are more accommodating and understanding in our general interactions with them going forward. So yes, this bringing your whole self to work, I really hope that that remains a strong part of it.
Yes, let's hope so, Catherine. Emma, from your perspective, have you seen that change about more firms acknowledging that, you know, men and women need to actually have caring responsibilities, need kids to worry about, etc.? What's your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Catherine. I think it's much more visible and it's more acceptable. But I think we've got to be really careful, because when kids go back to school, culturally, will we just go back to assuming that everybody is automatically available and move on? And I think we've got to make sure that, you know, this stuff doesn't just happen, that organisations have a responsibility to, as I said in my talk, think about kind of not just, we're giving people more control over how they work, and think about changing maybe some of the schedules and the structures and the meetings and the expectations, and crucially, being open to people working less as well. So I think, you know, part-time is the sort of Cinderella of flexible working. We've all worked in different locations, but actually a lot of people want to work less, and they don't want to have to give up the opportunity to progress because they want to work less. And I think that's the one thing I would say we really need to think about going forward.
Thanks, Emma. Emily, what's your view? I suppose really we're talking about work-life balance, aren't we?
We are, absolutely. And I think my optimistic view is that the past year we've all been more visible, and men and women alike, and I think that has actually hugely helped. We have all been on calls where our children are interrupted, but equally we've been on calls where our male colleagues' children are interrupted. So that has acted as a levelling thing, I think. I would argue that women have still taken on mental responsibility, but I know I'll get backlash for that. I'm talking about my personal experience. I might not be the person looking after the kids, but I know what they're eating for lunch, I know what they're eating for dinner. So I might be on this call, but I know exactly where all of them are, I know what they're doing, you know. And so I think there's got to be a recognition that visibility is one thing. I think we as women are still protecting ourselves. I don't think we share everything, because we're still professional, and actually we want to put forward a professional front, and that's really important. My worry moving forward is exactly that we all think now it's fine, and then we continue to try and juggle, and we continue to try and do too much, because we are, exactly as Emma I think said in her talk, we're all working longer hours, and it's not sustainable. My current day is not sustainable. I'll be the first person to say that, and it won't magically go back to normal on Monday, you know. And I think that's the misconception. And I think we as managers need training. I think we need to talk very openly to our staff. We need to ask them what hours they are actually working. We need to ask them what they want to go back to. You know, there's got to be more communication and collaboration, and not just this imagination that it's all going to be perfect from Monday. So
no, indeed. I mean, work-life balance has been something that's been around for donkey's years. Construction News is 150 years old this year, and I was looking back at some of the issues that were tackled in really 150 years ago in our publication, and work-life balance was one of the first editorials. It's amazing that we're still talking about it 150 years later. Emma, I want to move on to a new topic. Obviously, in the past year, a lot of companies have had financial strain. There's been these unusual patterns of working. A lot of sort of promotion and career development paths may have been put on hold, and things like that. Training schemes mothballed. What's your advice to companies to make sure that they think more broadly as they hopefully bring these things back on stream, to make sure that women are not overlooked for sort of bottled up opportunities for promotion?
Be open to flexible working is my short answer. No, I mean, as I said, I mean, there's a huge amount of evidence that shows that the lack of progression, particularly for women, is often structural. It's not that they don't have the skills or the ambition. It's that if you need to work differently or flexibly, you are less likely to be able to progress, because there are less good quality senior roles that are open to part-time flexible working than entry level. And women often overlooked if they're working part-time. So I think opening up more senior roles to part-time and flexible hours is really important. And I think we need to watch this space and see what the gender reporting duty tells us. There's been a bit of a risk that it wasn't going to happen this year. We've got to keep a track on this stuff, and we would urge organisations to keep looking at the gender pay gaps and keep talking about them and keep thinking about flex as a structural way to overcome that.
Thanks, Emma. Emily, from Midgroup's a relatively small company, so I'm not sure how structured its sort of promotion and career advancement processes are. But what's your thoughts and hopes about that side of things to make sure that women get the opportunities that they deserve?
I mean, just last week, the week before, we as a board have really been talking about how we revise that professional development review process, because I think historically for us, we're only 5 or 6 years old. It's still finding its feet, it's evolving. And I think we have maybe fallen into this thing of he who shouts loudest gets promoted, he who is more visible, the person, not he, that was an accident, but that person that is more visible, that makes more noise, that all of these things get promoted. And one thing we've absolutely been talking about in the past few weeks is how we can make that PDR, professional development review process, more focused on progression. Here is where you are today. Where do you want to be in 5 years, 10 years? It might not be at Midgroup. There's this thing that we don't need to keep people. If we develop people so that they are, everyone wants to steal them, that means we've done a good job. And I think the other thing that has happened as a positive this year that we need to tie into that professional development is evidence-based. So it is less about the volume of your voice and more about the work that you do, because we are seeing each other in person less. So, I am judging people more on the emails they sent me, the work that they do, rather than whether they can grab me around the water cooler or whatever that might be. So I think for us, it's going to be a really, really interesting time to see if we can get that evidence-based, training-based career progression to really reflect what, who should move forward.
Thanks, Emily. And Catherine, obviously, I'm sure Arup has highly structured processes. What's your take on making sure that women have the right opportunities for promotion and career advancement?
So we've tried something new this year. We have an annual promotions window. We tried 2 new things this year. One of them was that we advertised some of those roles. And we normally don't advertise and ask people to self-nominate. We normally have a role and then people are put forward for that role. So this was a real culture change for us. And we advertised 3 roles and we had 25 applicants. So that was opened our eyes to the appetite. There were people who wanted to put themselves forward. And we learned a lot from that process about who they were and where they were coming from within the company. So as Emily has talked about, there were some surprises there. And then when you delved a bit further, why were they applying for this role? It didn't seem like a role we'd expect, but we hadn't expected them for that role. They might have been really enthused by that role. So that's something we're going to reflect on a lot more, is how can you open up the applications so that people can self-nominate. But with that comes also the slightly disappointing fact that it wasn't a very diverse group who nominated themselves. So how do we encourage or enable or give that nudge or that hint or that, yes, go for it, you can go for it? Because speaking with some others who didn't apply afterwards, they're like, well, I didn't meet all the criteria. So how we position those adverts is going to be really, really important, and how we make them open to the most diverse group of people to apply. And then the second one is moving away from the strict annual process and being more flexible. So if somebody is out on parental or maternity leave, so male or female, if they happen to be absent from the office, that there's another time in the year that they can have the interview, that they can be put forward for promotion. It's because if they happen not to be around in March, that shouldn't exclude them from being promoted this year.
Thanks, Catherine. So some good observations there. We have some questions in from our audience. I think it's time to turn to them. I'm going to send this first one to you, Emma. There's a couple of people who have asked related questions. Jill, Marlowe and Claire, I apologise, I'm going to mangle your surname, Diashegi, have both asked about the informal contacts that we have with our colleagues and perhaps how they may have suffered in the past year. Jill is talking about how her caring responsibilities may have hampered her ability to join in sort of extracurricular activities, things like golf or even just going to the pub, whereas Claire is talking about the difficulty at the moment of, because we tend to talk to people for a specific purpose, we set up a meeting for a specific purpose, perhaps we don't have those informal discussions, the little chats that you might have had around the water cooler, for a better example, in the workplace. So Emma, for obviously having dealt with the issues of flexible working, what's your recommendations for people worrying about those sorts of the loss of those informal opportunities to make contacts and make career progress through that avenue?
It's a real concern, and I think, you know, there's a spectrum of it, from people just feeling incredibly isolated and that affecting their well-being, which we need to think about, through to networking and opportunities for progression. So I mean, we're seeing firms do lots of different things, but I mean, one important thing is to make sure to build opportunities into the working day, because, you know, and this has historically been an issue for women, which is, you know, networking events happen in the evening and they happen in the morning. And so even before the pandemic, it was very hard to always network, because you're often on the school run, for example. But it's, you know, even for people without kids, it's making sure that, I think there's an organisational responsibility to try and give people space. And I think we all need to take responsibility. And it's hard when we're working so intensively, but just to build some time into our day to have conversations with our colleagues, not necessarily about work, but just to have those conversations. I had a great example the other day of a manager, not in construction, but another industry, who, I mean, this isn't so much networking, but just more contact, was encouraging her team to have walking and talking meetings. So it was a health issue as well. It's just like, get off Zoom, get on the phone, go around the block, have a conversation with somebody, old fashioned, these things, if you remember them. And it just opens you up to slightly different ways of communicating. So I think it's just, you know, we need to just keep trying different things, and but recognise that, you know, our organisations have responsibility to encourage this as much as we have to kind of recommend ideas.
Thanks. Emily, you talked about your Women's Night In, which is obviously a great example of that sort of informal networking. Have you taken steps to make sure that that's as inclusive as possible, to make sure that women aren't, that otherwise might join? I mean, have you varied the times and things like that you've done them?
Yeah, absolutely. And and you know, we are about 70. I mean, we're growing rapidly at the moment overall. So, you know, from a women perspective, it's 15 or 20. And so we find times when everyone can make it. And actually the people that organise it are brilliant, and they're very passionate about it, and they have quizzes, and so they know if someone's coming from site, and so they say, oh well, let's do it at this time because someone can join in. It's always after bedtime, you know, so it's really interesting actually, because what we're not saying is do it in the middle of the workday, but it's about making sure it fits within your schedule and actually people can enjoy it. They're not going to go to work afterwards. It's not something they're squeezing in. There is this this want to be there. It's a lot of fun, I have to admit.
Thanks. Catherine, I'm going to, if you'd like to add something, go ahead.
I was just going to add, we tried something pre-lockdown called lunchtime roulette, which was the idea of that was to get people together who might not normally meet, and we've now shifting that to lunch roulette coffee, because you don't necessarily want to all eat in front of each other, but so it's random who you get to meet, and that's proving quite fun.
Catherine, I was going to stay with you for the next question from our audience, from Kerry Smith. How do we make sure that older women, or perhaps returning to the workforce after raising a family, aren't excluded, given the economic and other difficulties that companies face this year? Have you got a view on what can be done to address that question?
Oh, good question there. I think that perhaps it's interesting why they are viewing themselves as a different group, and that we've tried this year to put together some peer-to-peer groups. So we were originally having all the teams support calls whereby discipline. You know, all the bridge engineers got together and all the geotechnical engineers. And what we've done in the last few weeks is gather together people with similar cohorts, so people with younger children or people with caring responsibilities and people living in their own. And we've then started looking at, well, what will this look like in the future post-COVID? So is there a peer-to-peer support group for mid-grade staff, for staff in the, you know, coming towards retirement, and they can support each other? So maybe not a direct answer to the question, but that peer-to-peer support is proving very popular.
Emily.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question, because I've suffered a lot from imposter syndrome through my career, and I think that's quite common in women. And one thing I would really advocate is, at one point I took a step back and had a look at my career, and I have been a full-time mum, I have been a working mum, I have been a school teacher, and I have been a head of science. Now, that doesn't make what you would think as a construction CV, but actually each one of those things that I've done has brought a huge skill with it, most definitely. And I think we have to look at CVs and skills completely differently. This idea, I find it really bizarre. You know, the first sentence we all put when we're putting a bid together is 15 years in the construction industry. And I think, why is that a sell? You've got 15 years of a single perspective. Now, you know, these people might be brilliant, but isn't it better if you say, well, I've got a couple of years doing this, and I've got a couple of years doing this, and I am bringing all of this insight with me, so that we can, anyway, you can tell I get a bit passionate about this, but I really think that if we're going to innovate, we have to have a diversity of backgrounds. So I think there is really, really something about building confidence in that.
Can I build on that, Lem? Is that right? he's gone silent on my screen. Yeah. So I'm just going to add to that. I think you've
got something to add.
Yeah. So something I've often talked to people about is when they come back from having been out for whatever reason, and they say, oh, you know, I haven't been working for the past 1 or 2 years. I said, well, what have you been doing? All right, what have you learned? Okay, yeah. If you've probably learned loads about conflict management, about how to resolve competing priorities, all of these things. So exactly as you're saying, some of the most useful management leadership skills, then they're not to do with the technical stuff that we've been dealing with. And you will get as much of that from having handled a house full of teenage and young adults or toddlers as you will have done from being on site all that time.
I don't know if you can hear me still. I think my internet did freeze, but thanks for sticking. Emma, we have a question here about if there's a risk that flexible working might create a sort of two-tier stream where people who go down that flexible working route are disadvantaged in some way. What would you say about that kind of worry that people may have?
I think it's a legitimate worry. It's the first thing I'd say. I think we are seeing, I mean, we're talking about a kind of K economy, aren't we? We're talking about inequality rising, and it's a real concern. And I think for the industry, you know, we talk about it at times we've sort of got flex have and have nots, and if you can take a laptop and work remotely, in many ways it's good, and if you can't, then there is a challenge. I think we need the organizational side of this is about thinking about this fairly, and it's about making sure, as I said earlier, that I think, you know, we should believe that there is flexibility in every role. It might be different, but there is an opportunity to flex every role. And fundamentally, at the heart of this, it's about giving people some ability to have control over how they do their job, and some kind of input into when they work, where they work, how much they work. And, you know, I think smart organizations get that, because you know, they get that they will keep great people, and engagement goes up and performance goes up. So, but I think we've got to make sure that when we think about how we retain flexibility, we look at it across all kinds of different roles, because otherwise, you know, some are harder than others. And I think there's an organisational responsibility here to, as I said, to sort of lean into this and make sure that it's fair for everybody.
Thanks. Moving on to another question from Harry and Edwards. Someone who describes themselves as a junior within a construction team. They're asking how did junior Emma, perhaps you can give some advice about that.
The voice from the sky. The question was from somebody asking how a junior within a construction role can get their voice heard and make connections while they work from home. Emma, did you want to address that first and then move around the table?
Yes. So we're seeing, I mean, I think there's some real issues for junior colleagues because they haven't got the networks, they haven't got the infrastructure, you know, and I think people getting their voices heard when they're relatively new in an organisation. We've seen lots of people being onboarded remotely. Good organisations are creating kind of buddy systems. So if you're new to an organisation, it's about buddying somebody up. If your organisation hasn't offered you that, ask, can you be buddied with someone? It's all the informal things that you need to learn about an organisation that you'll get from a mentor or a buddy than a formal kind of onboarding process. And also just making sure that the way you need to work is kind of is recognised, because we know for lots of younger people that actually this remote working is an absolute nightmare because you're sort of flat sharing with 5 other people and you're on your ironing board and it doesn't work brilliantly. So I think it's about just articulating wherever the opportunity is and asking questions about what the return to work is going to look like and putting what you need forward. And then it's about making sure that you can have somebody to buddy with. You know, there's lots of interesting kind of reverse mentoring as well, but just somebody who you can talk to, particularly if you're new, about how things work, because no one always tells you that formally. You get that at the water cooler, at the coffee machine. You know, people say start at 8. Do you really start at 8, or do you actually start at 7:30? Those are the kind of things that you need to find out, particularly if you're new.
Yeah, I think another thing to add is I've had quite an interesting. Oh, sorry. Voice.
Sorry, I have switched my camera off because evidently there are internet connection problems. But please go ahead, Emily.
Okay, thank you. So I think one of the really interesting things for me that was an unexpected outcome of the past 12 months is our stepdaughter. My stepdaughter's living with us at the moment, and she started work about 3 months ago for a construction company, and she is a graduate, and so it's been really fascinating for me. It's not our construction company, it's another one. Watching her deal with absolutely all of these issues, and one thing that she has started doing is she will ask her line manager for half an hour, and then, because you know, I know how busy everyone is, I say just check their diary. You know, we all have this Teams thing where you can schedule half an hour in, and she puts half an hour in his diary, and she writes a list of bullet point of things that either she wants to ask or that she wants to say, you know, I tried this week, do you think that worked? And I think one advantage she has is that you can take notes. You know, you can write things down, you can get confident, you can kind of write yourself a script almost, so that in that setting you can approach it with confidence. So I think that's really quite powerful, just putting in 20 minutes, half an hour with a line manager, with somebody whose opinion you respect. It might not be your line manager, and just trying to get some feedback, because I think that's what we lose out on a little bit with this remoteness.
I've had some internet connection problems on my side, a bit of a nightmare when you're the chair. We've come to the end of our allotted time, I'm afraid. So thank you very much to our panelists, to Emma, Catherine, and Emily. Thanks very much for sharing your thoughts. Thanks for everyone watching today, and thanks again to our headline sponsor, Winmott Dixon, and our supporter, Juice. Our next Inspiring Women event will be on the 9th of June. We'll be looking at inclusive methods of recruitment. However, we now have 30 minutes set aside for some breakout discussions. So please do click on the on-screen link and join those networking sessions. But for now, for me and the panel, it's goodbye. Thanks for bearing with us. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.